law, a law about how the government money can be spent. So, um, I guess it might be that it's a law in process. So it's being legislated. Um, that is, it's going through the process of putting forward legislation so that it will become the law. Enforcing legislation, you talk about enforcing the law, whereas in this case, we're talking about decisions that a government has made or is making. And you can see that it's kind of, they would allocate, they're talking about what would happen in the future, based on these decisions that are being made now. So there's a sense that this whole thing is in process. Whereas if you use the word law, it's more common to use that to refer to something that has already been decided and now is being judged. Once it's something that a court can decide, we would more likely call it a law. Whereas legislation, in this case, it is a law that the government is putting forward. Um, yeah, but it's still in process. Yeah, I think they did pass that legislation. The the amendments to the tax cuts that are coming into force this year, that legislation was passed, and so in effect it is now the law. Um, but I think there have been some proposed changes to legislation around student visas and age limits for certain categories of visa. So I think that that's currently under debate, that legislation. They wanted to introduce changes to the legislation, um, to do with age limits. Yeah, and students couldn't get certain kinds of visas for to be research students if they were over 35. Um, but I think that they've amended that further. I don't think they're going to make it as strict as they were planning to, or there might be some exceptions. So, um, what they're saying when they decide what they're going to spend in the future, and they put that into legislation, they actually don't know what some things will cost. They can only estimate. And because this spending is actually not real spending, it's not like they've got money, it's that they're cutting tax when people do certain kinds of things. Um, so it's a budget allocation rather than expense. And in this case, they can only estimate what might what they might. Okay, so there is an existing agreement, basically, um, that is the bipartisan infrastructure package. So that's an existing agreement, and bipartisan means it's been agreed to by both sides of politics. So across a partisan divide. Um, and because there's an existing agreement and then there's proposed changes or additions to that, that they're using would, the legislation would rather than will. I think to say will would imply that it's definitely going to happen, whereas at the moment they're putting forward something provisionally. I don't know if the right word for this is subjunctive. I think it's um, setting up something that isn't certain, that's currently being suggested or put forward. Um, Whereas if it had been fixed in place and we were waiting for its effects, then we would say it will do this in future. Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, provisions is something that has been provided. So the agreed package, that infrastructure package, has already provided some clean energy support, but the new legislation will add to that. So it's going to build on that. So when they talk about provisions here, it's something that has been provided already in an existing package, but now there's legislation that is going to include more of the same kind of thing. So we're imagining that the existing set of arrangements is good, but we're adding something more to it. We're going further. So it's more of the same or more in the same direction or for the same purpose. And we're saying that that's like building something. So you can imagine that the infrastructure package was like the foundation of something, and then the new legislation is adding an extra level, and we're gradually building um, a whole set of clean energy policies, spending policies in this case. It means they're adding new legislation that does the same thing but does it in a slightly different way. Yeah. We're imagining that the whole thing is one project, which is to gradually spend more money on clean energy. So in the infrastructure package, there's already an allocation of money, and that's what we mean by provisions. It's provided money for clean energy, but the new legislation would provide more money for clean energy. Um, yeah, so I think in this case, uh, modernize might include more electrical um, equipment. Yeah, rather than like diesel trains. So it wouldn't be generating clean energy, but it would be allowing the network to run more cleanly. It seems to be about the United States. Um, but if it's the United States, then it would be the Republicans and the Democrats. If it's Australia, bipartisan would imply Labor and Liberal as the two. Yeah.